It's time for our voices to be heard.
No one wants to live or work in an Austin without music.
Musicians have a very powerful voice at City Hall.
Today is the first public forum about the Live Music Fund. It's happening at City Hall.
For the first time, we really have a great structure in place to communicate with our music community on the street level.
We can activate our base to find out what it is that musicians, really do want out of this.
An added music venue designation will open the gateway for other tools through which our music community is supported.
What would you say to musicians who are really scared right now?
Live music is part of the soul of this city, and we can't afford to lose it, or we'll lose a large part of what Austin is.
You're part of my constituent base, and we really want to make sure that we're there for you.
Everything I'm going to talk about tonight is no cost, and I'm going to make sure that you all have resources about how you can connect to us.
We are going to be processing those claims to see if we can help musicians and independent contractors, artists, and gig workers receive that pandemic unemployment assistance.
Take the time to sit down and focus 100% on that, creative process and write new material.
I quote my normal rate because I've decided that that's what I'm worth.
So when is it safe to start playing private gigs?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question.
Wait, is that how much you guys get?
Time stands still for me when I'm playing for these folks. They need it, and you just feel good.
It's the end of the year. We're celebrating the holidays with Ham. We're going to talk to them and find out all of the great things they've been up to this year.
If you see a blind person or anybody with a disability, don't be afraid to approach them and talk to them.
Live from Austin, Texas, it's time for Night Shift. On the show this week, legal counsel to Texas Workforce Commissioner Aaron Demerson, Felissa Chapa. Legislative assistant to Congressman Lloyd Doggett, Sarah Levin Jones. Entertainment attorney, Gwendolyn Seal. Tonight's episode is a special edition of Night Shift focused on unemployment. Our guests will be answering questions that were already sent in, but if you have questions, put them in the comments right now. I'll be your host for the evening. My name is Nakia. And now it's time for Night Shift, right here at ATX Musicians. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Night Shift. I'm your host, Nakia, and you are live here with us at Austin, Texas Musicians. We dedicated tonight's show to focus on the big topic facing so many of our Austin, Texas musicians right now, and that's unemployment. There are some big changes coming down the pipeline for musicians, gig workers, and so forth. So we have gathered together three experts who have been in the trenches these past months, really working overtime to connect musicians to unemployment resources. So let's please welcome back to the show, Felissa Chapa, legal counsel to Commissioner Aaron Demerson from the Texas Workforce Commission. Felissa is a night shift veteran and comes from a very musical background. So we're very happy to have you back now, Felissa. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and now we're also going to bring in Sarah Levin Jones. She's the legislative assistant to Congressman Floyd Doggett. Sarah's coming to us tonight from Washington, D.C., where she pulls double duty on Capitol Hill, and she's also a busy working musician. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Been looking forward to it.
We're glad to have you. And then our final guest this evening is Gwendolyn Seal, entertainment attorney with Mike Tollison and Associates, and a board member of the Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts, or TALA. You may know Gwen from her free weekly legal clinics or in getting connected to some of those unemployment benefits through TALA. Gwen has put in a ton of pro bono hours recently and working with Valissa and lots of musicians. So we're really happy to have you here and appreciate you bringing this all together tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, I know we've got a lot of information to cover this week. And so I definitely am going to kind of step back and let you ladies handle this because y'all have been working so closely together. So I'm going to take a moment and actually turn it over to Gwen.
Thank you, Nakia. I just wanted to start off by saying that I am so stoked to be here with these two incredible women who have been absolutely invaluable resources for both Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts and just the creative community as a whole. Valissa is truly the MVP of TWC. She has spent so much time over the last couple of months answering questions from me and other creatives. And Sarah has done such an awesome job of keeping everyone in the loop about what's going on at the federal level. So without further ado, let's start addressing some frequently asked questions that I've been receiving over the past couple of months. Most of these will be directed at Valissa, but Sarah, feel free to chime in as you see fit. So the first question pertains to work search requirements. As hopefully people are aware of right now, the TWC work search requirements that were supposed to begin on July the 6th have been halted until further notice. So, Valissa, does that mean that 1099 workers, like musicians, when they are filling out their benefits requests, do they need to state that they spent a certain amount of hours looking for work? Can they put 0 in that box? And is it the same case for W-2 workers?
So at this time, I would say that you should probably provide that information if you're asked about it. I've received that question from W-2 employees and from 1099 independent contractors. And the work search requirement has not been in place for several months now, but there have still been those inquiries coming through. So I would say that if you have been furnishing that information, continue to provide it. Just so that you can sort of stay in the habit, document that information. If it's asking for it, I would say to continue providing it. I will say that I am an attorney in the Employer Commissioner's Office at TWC. So all of the questions that I'm answering today are based off of the research and experience that we have in that office. And so the information I'm sharing is really based off of our office's position, not the official position of TWC. But we are trying to get the best information available. And I would say, yes, continue reporting that information if it's being requested.
To piggyback off of that question, if a 1099 worker is actively searching for work and is trying to restart their business and does happen to include how many hours a week she is spending searching for work and includes that information, will TWC flag that information and then happen to ask such worker for evidence showing that she has actually been going and searching for work opportunities?
I have not heard anything about TWC flagging those requests for investigation, especially in light of the fact that the work search requirements are not in place. So I don't think that that is going to complicate things for folks. I think that it's a good thing to document all of the things that you're doing to quote unquote, reopen, get to express yourself and do what you normally do. So I think it's a wise idea to document that just for your records, but I don't believe that reporting that is going to put you in a special category where TWC will flag your name and investigate further, especially because the work search requirements are not in place.
Perfect. Now, although that the work search requirements aren't in place, I imagine that, at some time in the future they might be. And so can you help me come up with some ideas of evidence of how a 1099 worker like a musician could prove that they're out there actively searching for work? Like just updating a website or saying on social media, hey, I'm looking for a live streaming gig count. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so we got a little bit of guidance from the Unemployment Insurance Division Director a little while ago, and he did say that he is going to be rolling out more official guidance as things evolve. But for now, there's a lot of things that you can do as a sole proprietor, independent contractor, gig worker to show that you are trying to get back to work. So that could be updating your website, renewing licenses, even taking training to obtain new skills, talking to potential clients, reviewing contracts, preparing bids, submitting bids, researching and preparing for a contract also counts, or if you have to obtain a required permit, and all the way out to even contacting past customers, any advertising efforts, updating your social media platforms, passing out or disseminating business cards and flyers, even researching local venues counts towards your work searches. So it's a very broad rule, and it's intended not to tie people down, but just to let you show TWC that you are making some sort of effort to get back out there.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that question. Now let's shift gears a little bit to tax implications. Really quickly, I wanted to provide the disclaimer that I am not a CPA. I'm a lawyer, so I can't give tax advice. But let's just talk about some basic tax implications here. So hopefully everyone knows that taxes are due on July the 15th. Are all workers, whether W-2 workers or 1099 workers, are they supposed to send in all of their tax documents to TWC at the time at which they file their taxes in order to keep receiving benefits?
So I'm unaware of that being a requirement for W-2 workers. I don't think that would really make sense because it's not based on their own tax filings. The benefits they receive for regular W-2 unemployment is based off of the base period, which is 4 quarters in their work history that they've already performed and TWC already has a record of. So for W-2 workers, I would say no. For the 1099, my understanding is that they have a deadline to supply their tax information if they are approved for pandemic unemployment assistance. My understanding is that they are supposed to furnish that to TWC by December 26th, 2020, specifically the IRS 1040 Schedule C, F, or SE. So I think that any requirement to furnish that to TWC falls on those who qualify for PUA, the pandemic unemployment assistance, and not for those who are approved for W-2 regular unemployment.
Okay, perfect. Now, a softball question to you. Are unemployment benefits taxable?
Yes, they are. And I know that when you sign up and get approved for unemployment after you apply and are approved, I believe that's a question they ask you, whether or not you want your taxes taken out now or later. And I know a lot of folks are saying to do it now so that they don't have to worry about it later. But you can do it either way, but yes, it is taxable.
Can I just jump in and ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
This is actually a question for Valissa. So if someone's applying for the first time and they are a 1099 worker, since you guys don't have their income information like you would for a W-2 worker, and they're sending over that 1099, is there a requirement that they need to file their most recent taxes in order for that 1099 to count? Or are you guys accepting 1099 information from like tax year 20, I guess it would be 2019 or 2018? Or is there an expectation that people should file and then send TWC their taxes? Does that make sense?
I think I'm understanding the question. So as far as what year, it's as far as I know, it's the 2019 1040 or tax documentation. So it'd be based off of 2019. And of course, they extended the deadlines for taxes and all that good stuff. So that's why TWC has a deadline of December 26th to furnish that information, because we know that people haven't done their taxes yet, and we're still waiting on that to
get
taken care of.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was going to say, there's a lot of musicians like myself who've been live streaming on Facebook and Instagram or Twitter and Twitch and all these other places. And there's like two scenarios, right? There's like musician gives her PayPal or Venmo and asks for donations, or the musician sells tickets for a live stream. Are both of these types of revenue to be reported when a musician submits for benefit requests every 2 weeks?
My understanding is yes. If it's any kind of earnings, whether it's W-2 earnings or earnings as an independent contractor, yes, that is, it's all reportable as earnings to TWC.
Gotcha.
So just to piggyback off of what Nakia asked, so a donation would still be considered the same thing as like an artist selling tickets to a live stream, because a lot of the time these artists are saying, oh, please, donate to me, and here's my Venmo. And so that's just a question that I think will probably start popping up more and more.
Yes, and that is a question that has not been directly answered by anyone with any authority yet. So at this point, my answer would just be a guess. And I would guess that donations would likely constitute earnings, since it's payment for services rendered in a way. And just because the definition of income, to my understanding with my brief time in tax law, was that it's very broad. So chances are that it would count, but I don't want to say for sure that it would. I think that that is going to be something that we will get with the UI division on, to make sure that the unemployment insurance division is aware of that issue, and that we can get a firm answer before it becomes, an urgent issue.
Awesome. So a few questions that have kind of popped up for me over the last several weeks involve back payments of benefits. And so, as everyone is aware, TWC was inundated with millions of unemployment filings. And so as a result, in some cases, it ended up taking a while for workers to be able to receive their benefits. And so our back payments from the time at which someone originally filed, are those being currently processed? And for those who maybe haven't received those back payments from when they originally filed, when could they maybe expect to receive that money?
Very good question, because it's happening a lot. At least several times a day, I have folks contacting me with that issue. So I did receive some new info that the Unemployment Insurance Division has now geared up its processing of backdating requests. Since there's been a little bit of a slowdown in other areas, they can now focus their energy to get those processed. Some folks I've spoken to have had their backdating requests already approved, but I know that's a focus that TWC is shifting towards, to getting that done faster. So there will be hopefully an increased speed in that. As far as the waiting time, I've had some folks tell me that it's happened after a week. I've had some folks tell me that they've been waiting 3 weeks. So I don't really know for sure the time it will take to process the backdating. That being said, if someone wants to get their claim backdated, what they can do is, there's a few options, and one of them starts with emailing. You can email the Unemployment Insurance Division about that, specifically the Ombudsman's address, and an address for that is ui.ombudsmen, OMBUDSMEN, at twc.state.tx.us. And if that's just too much, then you can keep it simple and email our office, employerinfo@twc.state.tx.us. It should be at the bottom of the screen right now. You can see that. Email that address with your name, your contact info, and the time you're seeking a backdate to, and we can forward that to the right department to get it handled as soon as possible.
And I would also add, I'm really glad to hear, Melissa, that you guys are working to do that quickly. We have also heard from constituents and other folks in the area about this challenge with backdated payments. So if you've reached out to TWC and you haven't been able to get through, because we know that they are super busy, please know that you can rely on our office to also serve as a way to connect with TWC. So you can reach out to our office either by calling our Austin or our San Antonio offices, or you can also email the congressman and explain a little bit about what's going on, whether it's a backdated payment or another issue that you need to resolve. And we can reach out through our congressional affairs folks at TWC, who are also awesome and wonderful and very responsive, and hopefully get you a response. So the way to reach out to the congressman for help is just to email him at lloyd.doggett@mail.house.gov. And eventually it'll probably find its way to me, and I can help you figure out the best path forward.
That's great.
That's great information. I've received this question probably about 3 times within the last week and a half. Let's say a musician receives a grant, like for example, a musician jumped over all the hurdles to get the Austin Music Disaster Relief Fund grant. Is that $1,000 grant something that should be reported to TWC when a musician is requesting benefits payments?
So it would really depend on what the grant is for. If the grant is given as remuneration or payment for work they perform for services rendered, then in my opinion it would be reportable income. If not, then the grant would likely not be reportable. That's another issue that I am seeking further guidance on from the Unemployment Insurance Division in the coming days, just to see if there's any more official guidance on that. But as far as the attorney team in the office I work in, that's how we understand it. It wouldn't be reportable unless it's payment for services rendered.
And I would think that in this case, because it's really not payment for services rendered, rather this is just to help musicians survive during these just awful times, that probably it wouldn't be something that would need to be reported. But that's just—
that would be my argument, for
yeah,
sure.
that would be that's my argument as well. So.
Okay, lawyers, wait a minute.
I would just jump in and say, if you're like wondering how is it that all of these people still don't know all the answers to these things, first of all, thank you guys for being so gracious and adapting and changing. Part of the reason why this is a challenge for all of us is because traditionally, as you guys I'm sure are most aware than anybody else, gig workers haven't qualified for this benefit. So there's a lot of people who previously haven't been able to be a part of the unemployment system who now are. And that's great. I think that this is a time where a lot of people need help. And that's why the federal government stepped in and Congress passed the CARES Act to help folks out. But because of this is uncharted territory for Congress. It's uncharted territory for TWC. So if you're like, how is it that these people don't know? It's because, we're still figuring all the things out. But, at least we feel very strongly that these benefits are really helping folks. And so we want to work quickly to get you answers.
Perfect. So the last question I have.
Do you have any other questions?
Yes, the last question I have is something that all of us TALA attorneys are just kind of pulling our hair in regarding. So if a musician happened to apply for and received an EIDL loan or a PPP loan, are those loans supposed to be reported as income when a musician happens to be requesting benefits payments? Or is it really only the portion of the loan that's being used to pay wages that should be reported? And is there, any further guidance that's come out or anything coming out down the pipeline at the federal level that will help kind of explain that more?
Right. So my thinking is that they would only have to report monies that constitute, earnings or wages. So the EIDL loan funds not used to pay for personal services would not be reportable as wages or earnings. They would be borrowed funds that can be used only for expenses permitted in the loan application. So you want to look to the loan terms to see what it can be used for. But generally speaking, with the EIDL loan, that money becomes taxable income only if the loan is forgiven. And I'm unaware of any circumstances under which the EIDL loan can be forgiven. There may be a change in that, but as far as I've been aware, I don't think that's changed. So at the end of the day, I don't think they have to report monies used for business expenses like rent, utilities, mortgage interest, things like that. Those funds are not wages or earnings and would not be reportable under payroll tax laws. So I think it would only be the funds that are actually used for payrolling purposes that would count as reportable.
Well, thanks so much for that amazing breakdown. Very detailed, everybody. We do have a lot of questions from our members as well that certainly need answers. But before we get into those, I do want to check in with Sarah about some of the things happening on the federal level. For instance, without action from Congress, the FPUC, or the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation amount of $600 a week, will stop on July 31st, which is only a month from now. The effects of such that many musicians will only be able to receive $207 a week in disaster unemployment assistance. It's impossible for people to live on $207 a week, and it is imperative that musicians start contacting their senators. Sarah, let's talk about exactly how to do that at the end of the show. But first, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. Number one, can you give an update from Representative Doggett's office about what is happening? Is there a bill that's been introduced in the House that asks for an extension beyond July 31st?
Yeah, absolutely. So on May 15th, House Democrats actually voted to pass the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act would extend two really important unemployment provisions that are important for musicians. The first is that pandemic unemployment assistance benefit that you talked about that makes it possible for gig workers to get unemployment. That's actually set to expire in the end of December. And so that would be extended until January 2021, which would give, even though it's only another month, it would give a little bit more wiggle room in the event that we have a different administration. Obviously can't make predictions about what that's going to look like. But the second thing that's really important is it extends that $600 weekly benefit that you were just talking about all the way also through the end of January 2021. And that, like I mentioned, already passed the House in addition to a bunch of other reforms. And the name of that bill is pretty easy to remember. It's the HEROES Act. And so at this point, we're waiting on the Senate to act. The clock is ticking. You're right. There's a month away. And so at this point, the call to action is on the Senate to do something about extending these $600 weekly benefits because the House acted on May 15th to get that done. And we're just waiting on many important efforts, unfortunately, that land in Mitch McConnell's graveyard.
Yeah, that is very unfortunate. But what is the best way for folks who are watching, musicians especially, to reach their senators who are holding this up? Is it better to send emails or leave voicemails, both?
Yeah, I mean, every single office kind of handles their engagement with constituents a little bit differently. You know, in our office, we love any way you want to contact us, if it's email, if it's on the phone. I think a lot of times people feel like they don't want to contact their member of Congress or their senator if they feel like they don't agree with them. But I would really encourage, you know, the people who don't agree with you are the people who need to hear from you. And in this case, you know, both senators need to hear, both Texas senators need to hear that this is a priority in Texas if it's something that's going to get done. So if you are somebody who likes to call and do that, and your voice will be recorded. If you don't feel comfortable with that and you would prefer to send an email, I don't think that there's any way, you know, that it's more effective. It's just whatever your preference is. I think sometimes people feel afraid to call, but just keep in mind, it's just people like me answering the phones, and it's our job to serve you. You elected those members to Congress to serve you, so make sure they're getting busy with serving your needs.
What other measures are Representative Doggett working on that affect the music community?
So one thing that rang really loud and clear, the congressman was actually a guest on the show. What was it, like last
3-4 weeks ago? Yeah.
Yeah, which was great and fun to see, and you know, had a wonderful time. something that rang really loud and clear on that call that we've also heard from people who've proactively reached out to our office is that if you have earnings both from 1099 work and from W-2 work, that 1099 work isn't being considered by the Texas Workforce Commission. And that's actually because of the way that the unemployment benefit was created. The Texas Workforce Commission has to look at your W-2 earnings first, and they have to determine if you can get those state benefits before they look at whether or not you're eligible for 1099 earnings. So what happens is they look at your W-2 benefits and then they don't count your 1099 earnings. And that's a really big problem for people who make most of their money, you know, in 1099 earnings, which is the case for a lot of musicians. So that's something that we're still working on. We don't have a specific bill yet that I can tell you to call people and ask them to co-sponsor, to join as, you know, in support of. But basically what we're trying to figure out right now is this third category of people, the 1099 and the W-2, how are we going to treat them? How are we going to handle them? You know, I think it makes logical sense that if you get both types of income, you should just pick. And if you make more, you know, of 1099 earnings, you should be able to claim those in addition to getting the $600 weekly benefit. But it's just a matter of how that would work administratively, because again, TWC is tied to looking at those W-2 earnings first. So it's about creating another step so that they also have to look at that 1099 earning. And really, you know, it should just be up to you. Whatever earnings you want them to look at should be the earnings that they're using to figure out your benefits. So we're working on that as a fix. We heard that that's something that musicians really needed. So we're still exploring what the legislative solution would be. But when we've got a bill title and we can tell you about it, we'll let you know.
Awesome. Let's get the other ladies back in here to answer some of these member questions that we have. The first one that we have says, which grants or advances will be taxed by the feds? And I'm just reading these questions as they're typed. I know the $1,200 relief check isn't taxed, but unemployment insurance is. I'm wondering specifically about the SBA grants to self-employed contractors and the City of Austin Musician Relief Grant. Now, we already covered the City of Austin Musician Relief Grant a minute ago, but Melissa, could you maybe answer some of that?
I actually don't know the answer to that one. Sarah may. My suggestion would be to call the SBA and hear it straight from them. They would know the answer, but perhaps Sarah has more information.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. So as far as the Austin Music Disaster Relief Fund is related, I know on their FAQ on their website, it says that the cash grants that they have provided are not classified as income and therefore would not be subject to a federal tax. And so I think that's why, Alyssa, you were saying that, you know, probably you can't say for sure, but it would make sense that, you know, they also wouldn't have to report those to TWC. As far as other small business related loans, because I know the question specifically mentioned that, it wasn't specific about what type of loan. So it's a little difficult to answer it completely and fully, but if they're referring to the Paycheck Protection Program, which self-employed gig workers were eligible for, then so long as that loan, so long as they don't have to repay the loan. So basically, if you meet the terms of the loan that were established in the bill, which one of the primary terms is that you have to use a portion of the loan to go towards payroll. If you meet the terms of the loan, then you don't have to repay it, and then you don't have to pay taxes on it. The other thing to note, though, is if those things happen, then you also can't you can't deduct it on your taxes because that would be like sort of a double benefit. But so long as you don't have to repay the loan because you met the terms, then as far as the Paycheck Protection Program goes, then no, it would not be taxable.
The next question says, I have one W-2 and a dozen 1099s that represent my income from last year. In this scenario, the TWC only used my one W-2 to calculate how much unemployment insurance I qualified for. Have they figured out? And obviously, I think we just kind of covered through this that we're still waiting to figure this part out, right? So unfortunately, that's not a way to figure that out just yet. We're hoping to get there. Next question. I just spoke with my booking manager about all of this, and she told me if I ask venues to do live streams and continue trying to book things in any way, it can count as me trying to seek employment. Melissa, Gwen, thoughts on that?
So I would agree with that. That goes in line with some of the bullet points I discussed earlier. Just reaching out to places where you can perform, doing your research. I think those things would count.
Yep, I agree.
Absolutely, I agree.
Next one. I applied for benefits before filing 2019 taxes. They gave me benefits based on zero income. I immediately filed taxes and submitted all that paperwork. My benefits never changed. It was notified, or was never notified a receipt or an update. There is no contacting them, and my request to contact me have been ignored. I think that the easiest thing would be for us to go back to that member and offer to personally connect them with somebody at TWC. But Melissa, any specific reply to that?
Oh, we're happy to help. So although my office can't actually fix that issue, we can forward your message to the people who can. So send an email to employerinfo@twc.state.tx.us and give us your info. Let us know what you're trying to do, a good phone number to contact you, and we can get that over to the Unemployment Insurance Division to have someone contact you instead of you having to wait in a queue for hours or something like that. So that, I think, would be a good resolution for that issue, so that we can get you in touch with a representative to look into your claim and your case and see if there's anything else that needs to be done.
Thank you. Okay, question 5. And this one's a doozy, so stay with me. At the beginning of this, I applied for for SBA loans as well as unemployment. I've had unemployment benefits this whole time. I was approved for a PPP loan as well, but have not touched it, and I am considering whether I need to get off unemployment or pay it back completely. I keep finding inconsistent info on this. If I use it for other purposes and don't ask for forgiveness or pay it back, can I legally stay on unemployment? I don't want to double dip or do anything illegal, so I'm wondering if anyone knows how, or if these play together with the 24-week period, or if I should just pay it back in full. Ugh, it's so confusing.
It is confusing, and there's a lot of moving pieces, so I hope I can clear it up a little bit. So I'll start by saying that the loan system with PPPs and EIDL loans, all of that, and unemployment are two separate systems. They don't talk to each other. They don't know each other's goings on. There's no link between the two. So it could be double dipping, though. If the PPP funds are used to pay you earnings, then that would be considered earnings that would either reduce or eliminate how much unemployment you're receiving. And it's a tricky question because, number one, you want to look into the PPP loan specifically, see what the terms are, see what the money can be used for. And then at that point, you'd have to make a choice. How I see it is you have a pie of unemployment benefits that you can eat from. And every time you do a payment request every 2 weeks, you're asking for a piece of the pie. So eventually you could run out of pie, or you could go back to work or pay yourself through the PPP loan and stop receiving pieces of pie during that period. And then that's what a lot of folks are doing. When the PPP loan runs out, they're going back to file their payment requests and just asking for more pie. So I'll try to break it down a little bit more. When you file a claim for unemployment, it stays active for a whole benefit year. You have a year to eat the pie. So if you go back to work, or if you get money through the PPP loan or things like that, you can continue filing your payment request every 2 weeks, but reporting your earnings through the PPP loan and get no pie for those weeks. And then if the loan runs out, you wouldn't file a new claim. You would just say, hey, give me more of my pie until it runs out. So number one, I think it depends on what the PPP loans or monies are being used for. And if it's being used for earnings, then that would be considered, double dipping. But some PPP loans are 75%, not 100% of your regular earnings. So there's a possibility you could still qualify for some partial unemployment benefits while receiving PPP funding. It just depends. It's a very complex system. So it's a tough decision to make. I would say that if it were me with my business and my loan, I would consider first whether or not I want to eat my whole pie now and I'd want to look into the PPP loan and the forgiveness terms and see if that's the way I want to go. Some employers have just returned the PPP money back once their employees got on unemployment. No harm, no foul. They just returned it 100%. Others used the PPP loan, and then when that ran out, their folks just kept filing those payment requests. So you should not be double dipping, but you can. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
like,
so that's the basic rundown. It's a tough decision. I wish I had a firm answer because that's what I like to do, but I have to give the classic lawyer answer. It really depends. It just depends on if you want to eat some of your pie or if you want to go with the PPP.
You've got to stop with the pie thing. I haven't had dinner yet.
I would just jump in and add, I think that like a lot of people have a very real tangible fear that they're going to get kicked off of unemployment. And so people have reached out to us like, you know, how do these two benefits interact? And so I think so long, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so long as you continue every 2 weeks at that recertification requirement to engage with TWC, to fulfill that requirement, whether it's you're reporting, I have no earnings this week, or I'm reporting, I have some earnings, or I'm reporting, I used some of my loan towards these expenses. As long as you continue to interact with TWC, there should not be a case where you're just kicked out of the system and you have to reapply all from the beginning. So I just want to hopefully ease folks' fears about that, because you can move in and out of getting your benefit and still stay in the system, and you don't have to start from scratch.
That's exactly right. Everything you said is exactly on point. Your claim is open for a whole year. So if the PPP money runs out, you're not kicked out of the system. You don't reapply. You just continue requesting payment. And Sarah made a really good point. You could, once the PPP loan comes in at 100% or whatever it is, you could stop requesting payments. And then if the money runs out, you could start again. Sarah gave an interesting alternative. Instead, keep filing those requests every 2 weeks, even though you're 100% back on the PPP loan or whatever that is. And that is actually the recommended course of action that I heard from the director of the Unemployment Insurance Division, is keep filing every 2 weeks. Stay in the habit. It's a little bit easier on the system if you do it that way as well. It's a little bit more complex if you stop filing payment requests and then you start. So if you can just keep filing those requests, like Sarah said, that's really, I think, the way to go.
Great.
And quick question on that. So when the work search does get reinstated, we don't know when that's going to be, but should it get reinstated, when you verify that you've been searching for work, is that at the same time that you would also be reporting any earnings? Is it the same time that you do all of that, or is it a separate reporting requirement?
My understanding is that every 2 weeks when you request payment, it asks you if you worked at all, and if so, how much you received in earnings. People are nodding in agreement. So I think that, and I do apologize, a lot of my knowledge is based on the employer side of things.
Sure.
This is all just, my opinion with what I've seen. But yeah, I think it's just sort of an automatic question that comes up.
Yeah.
And since your decision, is ongoing, you thought you were going to reinstate on July 6th, and now you've decided to push it back. I would assume that a lot of that has to do with the state of how things are in Texas as it relates to the spread of the virus and, people's ability to look for work. But I was wondering if you are able to explain a little bit about what are some of TWC's thinking when it comes to when would be an appropriate time to turn back on that work search requirement.
So it's hard to say, as the reopening phases were occurring, that gave us the TWC sort of the green light to say, okay, that we might need to be thinking about imposing this requirement, encouraging people to get back to work. And a lot of employers were calling saying, hey, we need people to come back. There was over 500,000 jobs open on the Work in Texas website. So now with things sort of getting halted a little bit because of the increase in cases, what I know is that they'll be reassessing whether or not to think about imposing the requirement again in late July. So that will be more on of an issue coming up in the next couple of weeks. But as far as, is there a new date? Definitely not, since we have no idea what's going to happen. So right now we're just pushing pause, and we'll see how it comes out in the next time. I do know that it's sort of the goal within the agency that if and when we do decide to reimpose the work search requirement, they will be giving hopefully, at least 2 weeks notice, I think, is what I heard last about that, to give people time to adjust. I also know that there's a lot of changes being made to the system, a lot of fresh updates and creative solutions to problems that we've been encountering as time has gone on. So I think by the time the work search requirements are reinstated again, or when the announcement is made, we'll have a lot more updates as far as Q&A, answering new questions, dealing with new issues. I think there will be more solid, firm guidance at that point.
For sure. So, the last two questions, I feel like that we might have already covered some of this, so I'm just going to kind of graze over these. The first one basically says they applied, they received one $50 deposit, and then nothing after that, despite many of their friends also getting the $600 a week for the last 3 months. The questioner said that they tried calling and couldn't get through. It's very upsetting for them. They're, to try to keep paying their rent and buying food, etc. And again, if you are watching this and that was your question, we've put up the email and the phone numbers there several times, and I'm sure Pat can throw it up there for us one more time. But specifically, please, as Melissa has said multiple times when she was here before and here now, they're there to help. That's what they do. And if you're still having trouble, as Sarah mentioned earlier, you can also reach out to Representative Doggett's office. The last question says, regarding the $1,000 SBA grant, one, do we report it as income as we receive it during a week we are requesting unemployment benefits? Two, if we get both W-2 and 1099 and our unemployment payment is based on the W-2 income, when we apply for the SBA grant, do we have to report the unemployment payments we've received in the compensation from other sources received as a result of the disaster question on the application? And I know that none of you work for the SBA, who's putting this out, but my guess would be if it says compensation from other sources received as a result of the disaster, you would need to list disaster relief grants that you had received there. Melissa, Gwen?
That
Sarah?
would be my thinking,
Yeah.
that you would report it, and whether or not they think it's relevant would be their decision to make.
Right.
If they really want to know, I always say, get it straight from the horse's mouth. Call the SBA and see what they have to say about it.
Absolutely. Well, that ends our section of member questions. If you've got questions and you've been posting them below, we will take all of those questions and then forward them on to Melissa. And if she has some help that she can offer, we will certainly reach out to you with that. As I said earlier, if we don't get that federal pandemic unemployment compensation extended beyond July 31st, that $600 a week that many of us are receiving will end. Then musicians and gig workers will only get $207 a week in disaster unemployment assistance. As it is impossible for any of us to live on that amount, we now come to the portion of doing what we do best, which is helping to activate our Austin, Texas musician superpowers. Turn up the volume and let our voice be heard. So we need you to call, write, or email, or all of the above, your senators, and let them know that we need them to act now. Unless they want to see a huge portion of their constituent base have no reliable source of income within a few months or less. We're going to post all the contact information in the comments below with some sample text if you'd like to use. So let's definitely flood those inboxes and fill up the voicemail boxes until they simply cannot ignore our voice. And we will put that up on the screen for you there as well. And there we go.
If I can just add, I think when you're talking about this issue, it's really important, certainly talk about your own personal story and your own personal experience, because that adds a lot of value. It's important for people in Washington to hear what the impact is going to have on you. But I think what's really interesting about this is this $600 supplemental benefit, it's helpful. My dog's even excited about it. She's like, go to the senators. It's helpful to workers, and we know that, and your story can tell that, but it's also helpful to the economy. We know that people have been able to use that money and put that right back into the economy. And if that stops happening, not only are, people going to struggle to buy groceries, to put food on the table, to pay for rent, but the economy is really going to suffer as a result. And so I think that that's another important point to raise with your senators. And also, it's a public health issue. We can help stop the spread of the virus if people don't feel forced to have to go back to work when they feel that it's unsafe to do so. And when you put people in a place where they don't have any other choice, then they're going to do that. And so I think emphasizing all three of those points is important. I would also just add that today a new report came out from the Congressional Budget Office, which are the fancy economists in DC that tell us how much things cost, that looked at what would be the impact if we don't extend these $600 weekly benefits. And that report that found that for the average worker in Texas, if these benefits expire on July 31st, their average wages would be reduced by 58%. So more than half of what folks are getting right now that they are needing to keep the lights on, to put food on their table, is going away. And that might be even a higher number for you. And so that's where your personal story comes in. And that same report also found that 47% of the workers receiving unemployment in July who would get that cut are people of color. This is an equity issue when we're thinking about the people who are going to be impacted by this. And 53% of those workers who would be experiencing cuts are women. And so again, it's important that we're framing this not only about your personal story, because that's important, but also emphasizing the impact on the economy, the impact on people of color, impact on women, and the importance of mitigating the risk of the pandemic by letting people stay home and not feeling like it's going to sacrifice their well-being.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Sarah.
And I wanted to say real quick here, we've created some sample text to give to our audience that you'll see in the comments posted below. But you can take some of this text and write those letters, and we have included some information on how to get in touch with those Texas senators we mentioned. So we've got the contact information for Ted Cruz up here that we will post in the comments below as well. And we've also got the same for Senator Cornyn here. So please, I'll let Nakia talk some more about that, but please, guys, we really need you guys to get in touch with these senators and let our voice be heard to let them know we've got to get those benefits extended.
Absolutely. And, before we go, one more thing I want to mention is that everybody knows Austin, Texas musicians only works well when we stand up and speak up together. And that means getting out to vote. And early voting is open now in Travis County with joint primary elections happening on July 14th. We want everyone to get out and vote. And there's a great way to do this and still adhere to the safety guidelines. As you can see, curbside voting is now available in Travis County. You just, number one, pick a voting location, drive up and call the number. And then number two, select option one, and someone will bring a ballot to your car for you to vote from your car. And we will put all of that information in the comments below as well. One more time, I just want to thank our guest, Sarah Levin Jones, all the way from Washington, D.C., from Representative Doggett's office. Please send our love and thanks to Representative Doggett, longtime fan of his, and just so proud to have him up there doing this work for us. Shout out to Valissa Chapa from the Texas Workforce Commission, legal counsel to Aaron Dimerson, and of course Gwendolyn Seal, who's really, kind of helped put this entire episode together. And it would be remiss of me to not say that we could not have done this without Gwen's work. So thank you so much for all of the time that you've been putting in. And folks, if you're watching this at home and you need an entertainment attorney, there she is. So thanks so much. We will be back for another night shift. We have stopped doing these weekly because we've just been so focused on advocacy and growing our ATXN Pro membership. And if you're not an ATXN Pro member, please visit atxmusicians.org right now. Click on the join button and sign up to be a professional musician in our ATXN Pro membership. That will definitely get you in the loop on a lot of this stuff. We put it out way before we put it in the general public. We'll be giving it to you. We've got some exciting benefits coming up. There's no cost to join. It's a great way to get organized, to find other people in the community, and really for us to be united together in our voice as we speak up and take action. So thanks again for everybody. And thanks to Pat Buckta, our executive producer and executive director. Really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on Night Shift.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.